Nha. Nha. Hola, hola, hola.
estás? ¿Todo bien? Sí, boludo. Me vuelve a bajar para un de mierda.
Claro, no te rayes.
Me levanté y dije, ¿qué hago yo en mi vida? O sea, si yo trabajo, ¿qué hago? Para un peso.
Ah, mira, tengo que pasar por Exile aquí.
Para un peso, ya está. Qué bueno que hago. Tengo aquí al mano Mariano. Ay, boludo.
¿Te pasas por Exile?
Bueno, hace 2 horas. Es que me levanté y dije, ¿cuál es el sentido de mi vida, man? O sea, si no trabajo, ¿qué soy? ¿Qué soy?
Estoy paso por Exile.
¿Quién soy yo cuando no trabajo? No me conozco, boludo.
¿Pero te pasaste a un vicioso así?
No, estoy ordenando todo el inventario, estoy ordenando la vida un poco ahí porque...
Yo quería probar un build de hielo, pero... o de fuego.
Sí.
Pero me cuesta, tengo que hacer, te da una pereza cambiar todo. Buah.
Si necesitas gemas de asistencia, habilidades, todo eso, tengo millones, man. Millones.
No, ahora te voy a quitar, tío. Necesito las que le dan un... ¿Cómo se dice? Ves que los objetos tienen varios stats, ¿no?
Sí.
Hay una gema que te da un stat nuevo a un objeto amarillo. Necesito un par de esas.
Ah, pero vos sos un vivo, vos que eres la más extraña de todo.
No, pero es tan extraña.
¿Para cuál es? A ver.
Añade un... no sé,
Un modificador.
Eso sí, un modificador, una gema rara. O sea,
No,
un ítem raro.
no, de esos no tengo.
Bueno, pues nada, que me puedo necesitar, a ver. Ya sé cuál puedo necesitar, que a lo mejor tiene mucho programa. O sea, no son tan raras. Las de añade para poner una runa en un objeto.
Boludo,
No sé por qué no encuentro nada de eso, brother, pero...
son raras, man.
Muy bien. O sea, no soy solo yo el que no tiene.
Es muy raro eso, boludo.
¿Qué tienes? Que a ver si me puede servir algo. Algo que, no, que tengas mucho, que no te...
A ver, déjame ver.
Debe hacerlo por nada.
Déjame ver.
Quiero ese pis y ya subo.
Hacen un petete y deja el ojete. Yo soy virgen, no te creo ni un sorete. Te manda la parte y el culo te parte. Te la pongo hoy y te la saco el martes. Préndete de este chupete.
Así le voy a cantar a mi suegra, puta. La suegra que no tengo. Yo soy virgen, no te creo ni un sorete. Oye Siri, no servís para nada.
Solo intento hacer mi trabajo. Dime si hay otra cosa en la que te pueda ayudar.
Petea, petea, Wanda petea, petea, Wanda petea. Te presento a mi amigo Telechea. Haceme un pete y move ese ojete. Voy a hacer un brrr en esos cachetes. Mamando una chola en un Motorola. Y vos no sos trola que me corte la bola. La goma regate, la huasca traga. Voy a felicitarte y de paso aclararte. Chupando la happy vos sos un desastre. Si querés venir a casa, si podés practicarte.
¿Me dejas filmar? ¿Por qué filmas? No me estás filmando.
Haceme un petete, deja el ojete. Yo soy virgen, no te creo ni un sorete.
Do you want to have progress in your life? Do you want to be a happier person? Do you want to have a life full of meaning?
What you want is a sequence of expanding goals with no upper limit. And that's exactly what you see in Jacob's Ladder.
There's another weird angle on this, though.
I've been trying to think about prayer technically. That's a complicated topic.
Gratitude is a divine thing. It's managing your affective, evolved state so it doesn't manage you.
Why would you settle for momentary pleasure when you could be walking in the eternal garden? Hello, everybody. I had the opportunity today to sit down and speak with Arthur Brooks. Now, I met Mr. Brooks several years ago when he was CEO of the American Enterprise Institute. And after that, he ended up serving as a professor of practice at the Kennedy School and at the business school at Harvard. And that's where he is currently. He has a very active public life as well, and it focuses on psychology, philosophy, neuroscience of happiness. And so we talked about that. That was the focus of our conversation. And part of that was a matter of definitional clarification, which is crucially important because to understand happiness and to pursue it properly means that it has to be defined correctly. You have to know what it is and what it isn't. And it isn't, for example, in Arthur Brooks' conceptualization, reducible to instantaneous hedonistic gratification in the moment, right? And so one of the things we talked about was the distinction between pleasure and enjoyment. And well, understanding that in this introduction gives you a flavor of the conversation. So pleasure could be reduced to something like immediate hedonistic gratification in the moment. Now, a problem with that, for example, is that psychopaths can be pleasure-seeking. And if pleasure is regarded as a good in and of itself, then psychopathic pleasure-seeking also becomes a good. And that's not tenable, not least because psychopaths don't operate in their own best interest because they fail across time, and they're terrible socially, familially, from a community perspective, they're devastating. And so pleasure itself has to be elevated or sanctified. That's another way of thinking about it. And the terminology that Arthur uses for that is enjoyment. And enjoyment is the elevation of pleasure, let's say, to something that's iterable, reciprocal, social, future-oriented, permanent, and stable. So you could think about it as the gift that keeps on giving. And that is something that's akin to, what would you say, a combination of wisdom and pleasure. So we talked about many elements of happiness other than that, but that gives you a flavor of the discussion and hopefully a reason to continue listening. So welcome aboard. All right, Mr. Brooks, I think what we should start with likely is just a brief or lengthy, for that matter, walkthrough.
¿Ves que hay algunas gemas que te dan un skill?
Sí.
Si la cambias, te saca las gemas de ese skill.
Sí. Eso pasa en el báculo, en la varita,
Claro,
en el cetro.
claro, pues a lo mejor es lo que te pasa que dices que no hace daño de repente, no sé qué.
No.
Si cambias ya
No, eso.
pues,
No, bro.
me acabo de pasar por eso una cosa.
Volví a instalarlo. Volví al mismo mapa donde había dejado y todo andaba bien. O sea, sin tocar nada, deja de andar. Sin tocar nada, vuelve.
Bueno, pues ahora un bug.
O sea, me vuelve a pasar y me vino a bajar en serio de nuevo. Pero
bueno, a veces es una beta, ¿qué quieres?
y me caga en la paciencia, man.
Ya, bueno, pero yo qué sé, o sea, no arregla, no suelen arreglar rápido.
Yo creo que estos judíos que hacen este juego ya en el beta podrían ponerse las poquito más las pilas. Si pagáis $50.
No, pagamos 30, ¿no? ¿Cuánto fue? ¿50? No creo.
40, bueno. Yo soy exigente, boludo, con la tecnología, man. Bastante pelotudo puedo ser, pero por lo menos quiero jugar algo.
Of let's start with your publishing record. Give everybody a sense of what it is that you're doing and how that came about.
Thanks, and thanks for having me on the program.
It's a pleasure.
I'm delighted, and I write about human happiness. I'm a behavioral scientist by background. My PhD is largely, my work was dedicated to behavioral economics, but it moved much more toward the behavioral sciences and the psychological angle, and then later, more toward neuroscience, because everybody in the behavioral sciences now has to know a lot more neuroscience than they did when you and I were doing our PhDs. Just because we recognize that psychology is biology much more than we did in I guess the old days in the 80s and 90s. I came late to what I'm doing right now. However, I've only been writing about human happiness in the way that I am for the past 5.5 years, since I've been a professor at Harvard. I've written 2 big books since I came to Harvard. One called From Strength to Strength: Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. For strivers who are trying to understand the move from their fluid to crystallized intelligence, and why they feel like they're burning out in the middle of their careers, how they can actually get stronger and better and happier as they get older. And the second book I actually co-authored with Oprah Winfrey, called Build the Life You Want: The Art and Science of Getting Happier, which is just the basic, straight up science of human happiness that I wanted to introduce to large groups of people. That was, and Oprah Winfrey, she hosted the book, much as she would have hosted, somebody on her show when she had a talk show back in the old days. Before I was doing this, teaching at Harvard, and I teach a large seminar at the business school, the Harvard Business School, called Leadership and Happiness, that has 180 students, something like 450 on the waiting list, and illegal Zoom link they think I'm not aware of. And that's, before I was doing that, which is fun as an academic, I was actually the president of a think tank in Washington, D.C. I was the president of the American Enterprise Institute, a free market-oriented think tank, which I was the chief executive of for 11 years. Before that, I was a behavioral scientist at Syracuse, and before that, I was a professional French horn player.
Right.
From when I was 19 until I was 31. I went to college by correspondence in my late 20s and early 30s, and then left music and went and got my PhD and became a behavioral scientist.
Your PhD is... What was the focus of your PhD?
Public policy analysis.
Public policy analysis.
And my fields were applied microeconomics and mathematical modeling. And
right.
all I was
so
doing,
that's where you moved from into behavioral psychology.
Exactly right. So I was
like lots of economists.
Yeah.
Right. That's happening
exactly.
more frequently, right?
Yeah. I was mostly interested in human behavior as an economist. I got a great technical toolkit as an economist, but I'm not that interested in cheese markets in Bulgaria. What I'm really interested in is why people do the weird things that they do.
Right, so motivation.
Exactly right. Now, studying things that don't have typical economic rationale, like why do people give to charity? Why do people admire beauty? Why do people love each other? And using the empirical methods and experimental methods that you learn in an economics milieu made it possible for me to study these things. And the tap root of all those things turned out to be human happiness. So when I left my think tank, and I was trying to figure out what do I want to do for the rest of my life, I actually had a long process of discernment that culminated when I walked the Camino de Santiago across northern Spain, hundreds of kilometers walking across northern Spain, praying the rosary, and every day saying, Lord, guide my path, which is in a process of discernment is important. You've talked about this an awful lot in your work, and you talk about how people try to actually find what their purpose and meaning actually is through discernment. I thought it was to go back to my behavioral science roots and to look at what people actually most want in life using science and ideas to give them greater access to the truths about love and happiness.
Okay, so let's start with that issue of discernment. So I've been trying to think about prayer technically, let's say. And so that's a complicated topic. But you could imagine this. Imagine that your decision is to aim up, which is the opposite of iniquity. By the way, I found out the word iniquity means fundamentally to aim down, to do bad things while you're aiming at them.
Right.
Okay, so instead you decide you're going to aim up. Now you can leave that kind of amorphous, because you could do that in a spirit of ignorance. You could say, well, I would like things to be as good as they could be, let's say, although I'm not sure what that means and I'm not sure how to do it. But you open the door that way to the beginnings of something approximating fantasy. I mean, part of what your imagination does is seek a pathway forward, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can set something like an unspecified uphill goal, and that would be like a meditative or prayer practice. And then you could say, well, my desire, my aim, is to flesh out that conceptualization and to specify a way forward, right? Now, then you've set your perceptions and your imagination to work on a particular project.
Right.
The goal is to walk uphill, whatever that means, to clarify the nature of what uphill is, and to discern a strategy.
Right.
Okay, and then you said you walk this route, right, and that gives you time for contemplation. Okay, so walk me through that a little bit. You said you were praying the rosary and you were concentrating on something like upward aim.
Right.
And then you took time to do that, right? So it's like you give your dreams an opportunity to make themselves manifest in a situation like that, and that's part of that clarification process.
That's right.
So what happened to you when you did that?
So,
and why did you do it?
Well, as a neurocognitive matter, we actually understand what a discernment process does literally through pilgrimage. So, you know Ian McGilchrist's work, who's phenomenal, the psychiatrist, neuroscientist, the Scottish. He wrote The Master and His Emissary about the right and left hemispheres of the brain, the hemispherically lateralized brain, where the right side of the brain asks the big questions, but doesn't actually come up with the answers, because the biggest questions in life don't have answers, they only have understanding. Now, the left side actually solves complicated problems. The right side deals with complex problems. Complex and complicated are fundamentally different insofar as complicated problems, they're hard to find the solutions to, but once you have the solutions, you can replicate them with almost effortless ease.
Right. You can make them into an algorithm.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and the left hemisphere is actually specialized for algorithm production. Right?
Exactly right. And that's the reason that you use the left side of the brain disproportionately when you're looking at social media or using technology. Engineering solutions are left brain solutions. The right brain problems are those that have very easy answers. We won the football game, they lost the football game. She fell in love with me, she didn't fall in love with me. I have something I want to do, I don't have something that I want to do. But you can't answer the questions. You can only have an understanding of the questions. And to come to the understanding of those questions, you have to sit in the right hemisphere of your brain. And to sit in the right hemisphere of your brain, you have to be undistracted and let your mind wander to stimulate the default mode network in your brain, which is intensely uncomfortable. Because we hate boredom. When you were at Harvard, Dan Gilbert, your colleague Dan Gilbert, who's wonderful, social psychologist, he did all those experiments about people being bored. So he would put people in a room for 15 minutes with nothing to do, except they had a button in front of them. You remember these experiments?
No,
if they
not
touch the
specifically.
button, they get a painful electric.
Oh, yes.
And it turned out that 80% of the participants shocked themselves rather than letting their default mode network run free.
And even animals will do that.
Yeah.
Bored animals will shock themselves.
Absolutely. And one, they had to throw out this particular guy because he was such an outlier, shocked himself 190 times in 15 minutes. We hate boredom. We hate the default mode network. But unless you engage the right hemisphere of the brain and the default mode network by purposively just walking and repetitively praying, unless you manually stimulate that part of your brain, you are not going to come to understanding about the why of your life. You're going to be stuck on the how and what, and you're going to be path dependent, and I knew that.
Perhaps part of that discomfort. So Carl Friston, we did some work in this regard too. Carl Friston has associated negative emotion, anxiety more specifically, with high entropy states. So, and you can think about a high entropy state as a state of navigation where a very large number of pathways are potentially open to you, right? And so if you open Pandora's box, if you move away from a determinate goal and you open Pandora's box, which is what direction should I go, then that is anxiety provoking because there's a multitude of possibilities that beckon. Now, there's opportunity in that, but it can easily overwhelm you, especially if you're tilted more strongly towards negative emotion, let's say. So the problem with opening up a space of contemplation is that open spaces are unprotected and high entropy.
Right.
And so there's negative emotion. That,
For sure.
Well, that's why we know, too, that the default emotion associated with right hemisphere activation is negative emotion.
It tends to be
apprehension.
high negative affect. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you're familiar with the PANIS test, the positive affect, negative
Yeah,
affect sequence,
yeah.
which is I administer it to all my students at Harvard. I make them take this because I put them into 4 categories. The high positive, high negative category. That's high affect people. That's you and me, which are the mad scientist profile. The high positive, low negative, which everybody wants to be, which is actually not great for a lot of things, which is the cheerleader.
It's impulsive.
Yeah, that's the cheerleader. And they make bad bosses too, by the way, because they can't take criticism or hear bad news. You have people who are high negative and low positive, which is the poets. And then the people who are low affect, low, those are the judges.
Right.
You know, very, very low affect, sober,
Stolid.
They make good surgeons, right? You don't want somebody to cut you open and say, "Oh my God."
Right.
That's not what you want. And so I actually categorize people and then talk about the strengths and weaknesses that each one of these has. Now, the people who are most likely to be able to affect discernment most at least conventionally by undertaking these techniques are the mad scientists. Because they have access to very high levels of affect, but they have to understand themselves to do that. This was the thing. I had this background as a behavioral scientist, and I wanted to know the why of my life, and from that to figure out the direction forward, or uphill, as you say. So that was 2 questions. Yeah.
The why and the direction.
Yeah, for sure.
Why is that 2 questions rather than 1?
Well, the why of life is really the meaning of it all. And then once you understand the meaning, then you can figure out what direction you're going in, because the direction per se is not meaning. The direction is just a direction.
Fine.
So in other words, here's the
That's the difference between strategy and aim.
Exactly. So in sailing, there's a concept called the RUM line. Are you familiar with it?
No.
RHUM line, and it's a very important metaphor in Spanish. It's called el rumbo in Spanish, and that's something you use a lot. The RUM line. What it is the direction with the destination, and you have to have it if you're doing navigation and sailing.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're going to go exactly to that point, or you're not going to get blown off course.
Yes.
You can't actually make any progress unless you have a RUM line. And so that's the whole idea. The meaning is the RUM line. And then you can start making progress toward the goal, notwithstanding the fact that it's not perfect.
So there's an idea in the Old Testament that the firstborn is to be sanctified to God. And I think the reason for that is that the aim sets the frame.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So if you start a new endeavor, which you do sequentially during the day, right? Because your day is composed of a whole variety of journeys, essentially, events towards a destination.
Right.
You set the aim, and that sets the frame of perception, and it actually calibrates your emotions, right? Because positive emotion, this is another thing that Friston established, I think, better than anyone else. This is very cool. So negative emotion indicates a high entropy state. Too many convening RUM lines, let's say. Positive emotion makes itself manifest when the entropy in relationship to a goal is decreased. So once you establish the goal, right, there's a certain calculated cost to getting there.
Right.
Right, and that cost is going to be indicated in part by anxiety, because it indicates, well, the risk for the endeavor. Okay, when you take a step forward to the location, you reduce the entropy because the probability that you'll succeed is now increased.
Right.
And that decrease in entropy is marked by dopaminergic activation of positive emotion.
Yeah.
So it's so cool because it means this is so cool. It's one of the things I've been lecturing to people about as I travel. It's like
missions to Mars, driverless cars, AI chatbots. Feels like we're already living in the future. Well, Robinhood is built for the future of trading. Robinhood's intuitive design makes trading seamless so you can spot opportunities to take control of your trades. You can now even trade your stocks and crypto all in one place. Sign up for a Robinhood account today. Investing is risky. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Cryptocurrency services are offered through an account with Robinhood Crypto LLC. Robinhood Crypto is licensed to engage in virtual currency business activity by the New York State Department of Financial Services.
Your aim sets your emotional frame. Like, there's almost nothing more important to understand than that. It's like, because your brain can't compute what's positive until it knows what the direction is and it sees you making progress. So no aim, first rule there is no aim, no positive emotion. And the second rule is progress towards an aim once specified is positive emotion. And then there's a corollary, which is something like, well. It's like steepness of approach. Let's say you make some approach to a goal, but the goal doesn't really matter. It's like you're not going to get a lot of kick. But let's say if you have a really high order goal, that would be one that would be divinely inspired, let's say. Well, then any progress towards that is going to give you a kick.
The progress is actually what instantiates the liking, the wanting, liking, learning process. That's from dopamine.
Yes.
That's what it comes from. Humans are made for progress, not for arrival.
Yes.
And so the whole process
Yes.
is, okay, discern the rum line.
Yeah.
Figure out the instantiation of what that means, practically speaking, and then start making progress toward it.
Yes, and that's what a leader communicates to people.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's why people will run through a wall for a great leader, but that's what you must do for yourself.
So I got something cool to tell you about that psychobiologically. I learned this from a friend of mine. I did a podcast with him, and he's a deep biological thinker, and he was very interested in honeybee communication. So what honeybees do is they go find a flower patch that's a treasure store, let's say, right? So it's an aim for the honeybees.
Right.
And they go back and they communicate about the direction and the distance. So they communicate about the energy that has to be expended to go to this flower bed. But one question the other bees have, so to speak, is, well, is the journey worth the effort? And the way the honeybees communicate that is that the more rich the storehouse, the faster they dance. It's exactly the same thing that enthusiastic leaders do when they're talking about the goal. It's like, so the way people calibrate that is like, if I can see you enthusiastic and energetic about something, I assume that you truly believe that the goal is worth the effort, because otherwise you wouldn't risk expending that much energy.
Exactly.
So that's, well, I think it's so damn comical that it's stable across like honeybees and people.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, anybody who doesn't believe that psychology is biology,
they just don't know the biology.
They just don't understand the biology, right? And so, but there's another weird angle on this, though. See, this is one of the great paradoxes of this. So do you want to have progress in your life? Do you want to be a happier person? Do you want to have a life full of meaning? Number one, discern. Number two, create a strategy about actually how to arrive at the object of your discernment. And number three, start making progress toward it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is like 1, 2, 3. This is what I advise.
Behavior therapy 101.
And this is when I'm talking to young men.
Yeah,
because all the email that I get, all the email that you get is from young people in their 20s. You know, how do I fall in love and stay in love? How do I find a job that's actually going to give me fulfillment? How do I have the life that I want to have because I have this hollowness in my life? Like 1, 2, 3. Yeah. This is what we talk about. Here's the paradox. Here's the hell of it. If you arrive, it's a problem.
Yeah, right.
Because that's the arrival fallacy that we come up with. So a lot of people will say, why do all diets fail? Because they basically do. 95% of diets fail insofar as at 1 year after the inception of a diet, people weigh more than they did at the beginning of the diet. Right? This is before the GLP-1 drugs, et cetera, et cetera. Why? And the reason is because you will forego all of the food that you like if you see the scale go down, because progress is everything.
Yeah.
Because humans are made for progress. All of our utility, we get so much dopamine in the wanting, liking, learning process actually from progress. The reward for actually hitting your goal is you never get to eat what you like ever again for the rest of your life. Congratulations.
Right.
That's why 30% of stringent diets lead to eating disorders, because people are like, I want more progress. And so they keep making progress. And that's when healthy eating or healthy dietary patterns turn into unhealthy dietary patterns, is because people want progress so very much. So the paradox of all this is you better have a rum line. And that rum line better be pinned someplace else.
So one of I've been studying these ancient stories in the Old Testament a lot.
Congratulations on the new book.
Oh, thank you.
It's phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. So one of the things that I really tried to delve into was Jacob's vision.
Yeah.
It's very cool, because Jacob, when he has the vision of Jacob's ladder, Jacob's a bad guy.
Yeah.
He's in collusion with his Oedipal mother. He's deceived his father. He's betrayed his brother. He's a mama's boy. He's intellectually arrogant. He's a coward. He's a bad guy.
Unlikable character.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But then he leaves, and he decides that he's going to be good. He's going to try to be good.
Right.
That's when he has that dream. Now, the thing that's cool about the dream that's relevant to our discussion is that, so you have this Jacob's ladder, which what would you say, spirals up into the ineffable, right? You can't see the pinnacle. The pinnacle is wherever God is, but you can't see that. And the reason I think that that's relevant and important is because of the paradox that you just described. If you reach your goal, you satiate the system and the motivational framework disappears. Right? So that means there's no direction and there's no hope. That's the problem.
Right.
It's weird because you've attained your goal, but now you're directionless and technically you're hopeless because hope comes in consequence of positive emotion in relationship to a goal. So actually what you want, you might think that paradise is the land of milk and honey, so to speak, that it's the land of infinite satiation. But the problem with that is satiation destroys the frame and destroys hope. So actually what you want is a sequence of expanding goals with no upper limit. And that's exactly what you see in Jacob's ladder. It's like, so you climb, and this is different than Sisyphus, right? Sisyphus pushes the rock up the hill and then it rolls back down the same hill.
Right.
It's like, no, what you actually want is a mountain. And then when you get to the top of that, you can see another mountain. And then when you get to the top of that, you can see another one. And that never comes to an end. So that would be an inexhaustible source of motivation and hope.
Yeah.
And it is independent, in a way, it's independent of accomplishment because there is no final goal.
Right.
But you don't want there to be a final goal because then you run into the problem of the paradoxical problem of satiation, right? And it is also strange, and you were touching on this, that one of the really weird things about human beings is that we're far more seeking-oriented than satiation-oriented, right? Is that we do want the adventure, we want the craving, we want the desire.
The progress.
Yeah, and the progress. More than we want the attainment. Yeah, absolutely. You know, like I had a client once, I had a funny conversation with him. He had this dream of retiring when he was like 50, you know, and he had a pretty cut and dried, ordinary, algorithmic job, you know, and so it was okay, but it wasn't a thrill. It wasn't the meaning of his life, you know. And I said, well, what's your vision for retirement? And he said, well, I imagine being on a beach in the Caribbean with like a Mai Tai in my hand. And I thought, well, that's a travel poster, not a plan. And so I talked to him about it. I said, well, look, you're like a middle-aged white guy. You're going to sit on the damn beach for one day, and you're going to be so sunburned, you're going to have to hide for 2 weeks.
Right.
And then what are you going to do? You're going to drink like 5 Mai Tais a day or 20? For how long?
Right.
You're going to be an alcoholic in no time flat. You've got no orientation or goal. There was nothing to it at all, right?
Good luck on your divorce.
Well, right.
I mean,
And your cirrhosis.
These guys at Goldman have told me this for years and years. So you can make a bunch of money in fitness, of course. And if you're smart and you're motivated and you have your MBA and you come out like raring to go, by 49 you have $400 million. And I've seen this again and again and again. The people that I've worked with, I'm privileged to work with. They retire at 49. Why? Because they don't like their work. Their work is backbreaking, and they can't see their families, and they don't have love in their lives. But they've lost their chops on actually how to do these things because the plot has been lost in their lives, and so they retire at 49. Yeah. And then they become very good at golf or tennis. Yeah. And they get a nice dark tan. Yeah. And pretty soon they're having an affair with their tennis coach, and then their life really falls apart. Yeah. And here's the thing. Here's the thing, Jordan. Woe be unto the man whose dreams come true, because he will find that he had the wrong dreams. Yeah, right, exactly. This is a real problem. Well, that's also part and parcel of the call to religious humility. It's like, I want to get what I want. It's like, what makes you so sure you're right about what you want? So I think that notion of, this is something I've been discussing with my wife a lot, because she really learned this in the last few years, is that, so we talked about setting an emotion